Thanks. So thanks for joining us. We're going to have a talk with Tim and Matt and go through a little bit of their journey in their data centers and how they've gone from sort of being more reactive to being able to be more proactive and working better with the business and being more service oriented. And so I think you guys will enjoy that. I wanted to start this out by, if you guys have cell phones and you could go, I know everybody says put your cell phones away in this room, you can bring them out. But if you go to this web address, we're going to have a poll in just a minute right at the beginning. And I'll start one now. And so that should show up there and it should show up on your phone. You can vote. And in a few seconds, I'll post the results of it so you guys can sort of see who's in the room. And then I have one more question, and then we'll get started into our presentation. We got 2 votes. Oh, come on.
You might need to go back.
Oh, sorry, it's right at the top of the screen.
Which we can't see.
You can't see that either. HTTP/.
And tell them what they've won.
9 door 1. So that's the makeup of the room. So we got a couple of different people from different departments and different areas. A lot of IT managers or directors. And then we'll do one last poll and then we'll get started. So after we get done with this polling, we'll have a little bit of a presentation, not much. We'll go through a few slides, but by and large, we want this to be an open conversation with these guys. I think there's some really neat things that they've been able to do and learn, and we want to make that as available to you guys as possible.
Wow. Interesting.
So wow, it's fairly even. Does that work? Great, thanks.
What's the results? Can't read them.
So it looks like we've got 25% of people are how to better predict the need and consumption of my IT resources. That's 28%. Another 28% is how to better report usage and value to my business unit partners. 22% how to change from being seen as a cost center to being a business partner to my customers.
Okay.
So, and how can I track and find all my assets? Great. Awesome. Thanks, you guys. So we'll start with real quick overview. Many of you know Tim Garza. He's AIO, CIO of the Department of Water and Natural Resources. Been doing a great job in IT for over 30 years. And Matt Brown, who's with NetApp, he is in charge of a lot of the NetApp on NetApp stuff. So we see 2 views of the change in IT infrastructure and services model from public sector and private sector, and how they're actually, both their paths are very similar, and there's a lot to learn from both. So we wanted to first hear a little bit from Tim, and he can talk a little about some of the things that happened with him, and then we'll get into the conversation really between the 2 of them.
So based on your polls, really you're thinking the same thing that most people think, that, why are you changing? What drove us really was the business domain. Basically, what we were looking at is the industry drivers. We could not keep up with our business. We did not have the resources. We could not move at the velocity of business. We could not move at the velocity of technology changes. And the traditional IT service model was not working. And it's not going to work if you're going to try to keep up with that velocity. So that's really what drove us to this transformation. So really what we looked at really is, what did we have to change? We had to change basically our whole operational model. So we really decided that we needed to move to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. More importantly, we had to move to being a service provider and a service broker. We had to move away from being a traditional operational center, cost center, as the way IT government was. That means we had to change our mindset, our operational model, and the way we basically created relationships with our business. So that's really what we drove to. So over the last 6 years, we've been on this journey. We started with really focusing on where could we provide more capabilities and capacity, and then drive that consumerization back into the organization. You know, right now, a lot of times people say, well, IT cannot keep up with the speed of business. That's true, because IT has to be able to move a lot faster, and you can't do that on your own. You need to create what we call a multi-sourcing technology direction. You need to look at how you do business, and you need to change not only your technology, but your business model and your service model. And then you really have to build and change the relationships and the interrelationships with all of your customers. So basically, we moved to a hybrid cloud model and changed our internal service model. But more importantly, we changed our culture set. We became a service provider for over 33 organizations within the resource agency. We looked at each of our departments that had an independent IT shop, and we began to see who was good at what, creating centers of services, and then kind of redistributing those services and allowing people to do more consolidation. And the consolidation was around maximizing resources. And I'm not going to go through these, but these are fairly impressive. And the one thing I want to point out, it doesn't matter if you're in private sector or public sector. You can do all of this, you know, so don't let anyone tell you those constraints are real. They're urban legends.
Excellent. So it's funny. So my name is Matt Brown. I work for NetApp IT, and I get the great privilege of going out and talking to our customers. And it's very interesting. The challenges, no matter what type of an organization you're in, public, private, finance, oil, gas, whatever, are always exactly the same. Our journeys are very similar as well. Same challenges. How do we remain relevant in the 21st century in IT when business can get commoditized IT from a variety of solutions? The challenge then is to enable those options, but in a safe, secure way that protects our business. We started our journey about 5 years ago. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is kind of a proof point about where we came from. And before I talk about the image on the screen, as Tim was saying, in order to move faster than the business, you have to be able to create an organization that can take in and consume an enormous amount of change, yet remain stable. So in our journey, when we talk about visibility first is about giving visibility to manage change effectively, to manage change in terms of risk. The image you're seeing on the screen in our case is the verticals are the number of P1s. The big bubbles on the bottom is how long it took us to restore to service. On the left-hand side of the screen, we're being a very reactive organization, 80% of our time being reactive. Today, that 80% is being converted, as Tim was talking about, building relationships with our customers. Now, our customers internally are traditional enterprise IT shop, finance, sales, support, but nonetheless, building relationships with our customers. Today, we have people who is responsible for ensuring that they understand the business, IT people understanding how the business is operating, to stay ahead, as Tim was talking about, in our needs and how we provide services. Can you go to the next slide just real quick? This slide shows you the amount of change. So if I'm talking about consuming change rapidly and remaining stable, this is our proof point where we are consuming more change now than ever, and yet our P1s are very low. Now, we can now shift the visibility of information into focusing on our customers, understanding how our customers are using our services, consuming them, when, how. So when now we can have different conversations about investments, different conversations about growth and opportunity. Again, being more of a business partner, focusing on IT not as a cost center, but as a true service provider. And on the back end, leveraging all those wonderful commoditized services to provide those at the best cost and at the best capability, again, remaining agile with the business. Tim, do you have anything you'd like to add with that?
I'd like to ask the audience a question. Basically, what's the most important thing to you? What do you really support, especially you folks that are in government? Is it the infrastructure? Is it the data? Is it the system? Is it the information? What is it? Anybody? How many people think that the systems and applications are the most important thing? Raise your hands. How many people think the stability of your data centers or your infrastructures are the most important things? Okay. How many people think the information
It's all about information.
Okay. And that's the key, because really IT and government isn't about hardware, isn't about systems. It doesn't matter if it's software as a service, doesn't matter if it's on-prem. What your business need is information and data. What your constituents need is information and data. Those are the hidden jewels of what you protect and what you serve. And how do you help your business really maximize those? How do you turn that into useful business intelligence? If, for instance, in the water department they have tons and tons of information, but how do they make that useful? How do they make that useful to the local agencies? How about the constituents that live by levees? How do they make that useful? So that's really our job in government, is to be a provider of this information in multiple dimensional ways. And I think that's a key point of what we need to drive to. And whether that's using a hybrid cloud or a on-prem or some other type of model, it's really about where is it most appropriately to put this workload so that the consumers of that information can be effective. So questions? No. So you guys said about cost center. People think that in government it's a cost center. How many of you do chargebacks to your customers? Anybody? Okay. How many of your departments are considered IT overhead? Wait, overhead was,
Some of it.
Okay, so it's May, and I tell you what's going to happen to most of your departments if you're in state government. You're probably right now saying, oh, we got some leftover money. Let's go buy some PCs or some laptops, because the budget gets not managed tightly, and the next thing you know, okay, the program, we got extra money, you got extra money, let's go buy that. Is that an effective way to run a business? Is the most important things replacing just the hardware? So really what you have to do is get in front of that. Change your operational models, working with your business partners to looking at what do they need today, but what do they need 18 months in the future, and start planning to that. That's how you get out of being a subordinate cost center. You help orchestrate those spend patterns for your business. You just don't wait and be like a dog on a bone and hopefully there's some meat on it. So what else you want to know about cost centers? We don't want to just talk at you.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Can you share some of the steps that you took to transform from being more of a traditional IT shop to becoming more of a service provider?
Yeah, first thing we had to do is identify what were the important services to our customers. And we have two types of customers as a service provider. In DWR, we serve the employees directly. At agency, we serve the other IT departments who then serve their program areas directly. So those are two types of clientele we serve. So basically, we had to work through both of that clientele to really identify what was the important services to them. And how did they want those services delivered, in what fashion? And that's where we started that journey. Then what we had to do is really take a look at our baseline and how were we actually delivering services. We found out that some of the things we were focusing on were not important to our consumers. They were important to us. We've always done them. As traditional IT government, we've always done this, we've always done that. That wasn't what they wanted us to focus on. So we really had to get closer to the business and understand who our clientele were, who the consumers were, and who the stakeholders were.
Yeah, and without talking about systems then, what kind of information did you look at to educate you about how they were consuming services?
Well, one of the things we found out, quite frankly, is they considered IT basically a black hole. The reason a lot of times they weren't communicating with IT is because traditionally, every time they went to IT, all they got is it's going to take 2 years and a bucket full of money. Right?
$1 million.
So really, they decided to create what everyone else did, ShadowIT. ShadowIT is basically a result of your IT shop not delivering services to your clientele. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer, actually, in ShadowIT.
I am too.
I think ShadowIT is a benefit to any IT shop if properly understood and make it very visible to the organization, and then place that ShadowIT as a service provider, maybe in a given domain. An example is that application teams. In certain types of application teams, it's not as important just to be a great programmer, but do you understand what you're programming for? Is it financial systems? Is it scientific systems? Is it engineering systems? And you need to maybe put those services closer to the business. You govern them, but you let them rock and roll with the program areas. So I think those are benefits.
I completely agree.
So when you're looking at your clients and trying to provide the services that they're interested in, are you finding that there's a different type of application developer than there was before? Or do you have a different group who's creating applications, or are they doing it differently that allow you to come up with those solutions more quickly? Or I'm just kind of curious about the applications. It used to be the big names. Right now you're getting people, with the hoodies wearing the, banging out code really quickly and having applications created. What changed there?
I think we're still in that transformation when it comes to developing. One of the things we found out, again, we could not meet the velocity of change. So we really started changing our strategies around, let's first look, is there a software as a service that can deliver that? Or can we buy before we build strategies? For those things that were unique and that we had to actually help basically develop from the ground up, we try to look at ways that we could do that in a better partnership and maybe more of an agile approach. So that part of our organization is still maturing, but I think that we're going to get there. I think that the days of waterfall are gone. You need to really, if you cannot incrementally deliver a part of your solution within a 90-day period, it's probably dead on arrival.
I agree.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like young kids in hoodies. And basically, they just want to work.
Right.
But again, culturally, we talked about culturally. How many of you are managers here? Okay. How many of you grew up being managers? What you manage, butt in the seats, right? If the person wasn't set down, then they're not working, right? Doesn't work today. Especially if you want innovation and you want people to think different. These millenniums and these kids, they work, but they don't work on your terms. So you really have to change that thought process, so, right? So really, embrace that. Don't fight it, and utilize it to your advantage.
Yes. So along that ShadowIT, so we did a similar thing. We embraced them. We actually provided our ShadowIT folks with a front end to AWS Azure so people could go out and code all they want to. On the back end, we managed the contracts, the accounts, the security, all the ins and outs of the details, so we could manage it from a usability standpoint on the back end, from a cost perspective on the back end, and enable the business. The ShadowIT folks, building on what you were talking about, know their user base very well. They can develop UI like you could never develop UI. You could never get that level of requirement. So we do leverage them in that context, and I think it's a very powerful resource to have in your organization.
So I would say they mostly play IT shop, they're working silos. So you guys have a team approach where you guys work together to solve problems and stuff.
So you basically, the way I understand the question is, your question is most, traditional IT shops are kind of in functional vertical groups, just probably around what they support, like an application team, a database team, a server team, and so forth. Is that your question?
Yeah, because what I find is better when you work and the team approach and everybody, they work together as their opposed to
Yeah.
their silos.
Yeah.
And that's the traditional state department.
Yeah, I think you really have to change what we say your operational or your service model and go from being a vertical-based model to more of a horizontal-based model. Now, by that I mean you have to combine and abstract out some of these skills and some of these core competencies and put them in these horizontal teams that then can be a service-oriented team to attack given problems across your business. You still need core engineering skills like software engineer, back office teams, systems engineers. But on the service side, for instance, like provisioning, we went to a software-defined approach. So we had to really change our infrastructure, our service operational team, and combine the skills of networking, for virtual networking, storage, and servers so that they could effectively deliver the provisioning the way we needed it. We're also looking at that on our application teams. And so it's really about creating this collaborative organization. It's very hard to do because the biggest constraint really is not the people in your IT shop, and no one take offense to this. It's upper and mid management in IT. They have a hard time. They have a hard time with this concept, and it takes a while to break that down in your own mind.
So where we're at, because we're on this similar journey, I'm not as far ahead as he is, but we took the traditional technology towers, and as Tim was saying, we actually banded them with service owners. So it's the service owner who's accountable for being, for lack of a better word, a team lead. Because we're, again, not as mature in that space yet, we are still challenged with keeping current in the technology and keeping to a set of standards, while the service delivery then owner pulls them together to deliver specific services. And then we have a band of engineering people or service engineers, because service engineers and service delivery people are different, and then they're tied together on a customer-facing front end with what we call a business relationship manager. So that person's accountable for a certain area of business. They have a delivery, an engineering, and a support owner. So we're in the evolution of still working through the technology towers. But it seems like a workable step because, as Tim was saying, it's hard to go from one to a completely horizontal. So we're in that middle step right now.
So I think one of the things that when we talk about, what is your biggest asset, it's the people that can do the job. But the reality is you never have enough of those people, right? So you really have to come up with strategies based on your business and your own internal corporate cultures, whether that's a government department or whether you're in a private sector, whether you're supporting a different type of business. You really need to look at what that culture needs from you. And then you need to embrace how you're going to make your own changes. And let me just point this out. You're going to constantly make those changes. I started with this great model. It was great. It didn't work. It didn't work.
It looked beautiful on paper, though.
I'm like up here selling it, pitching it. Oh man, this is great. We're going to be the awesomest team in America. That plan turned out, and it sucked. So we really, and it was because I missed a key step. And the key step was really, what is the root of this overall organization that I'm supporting? Not IT only, but what is the sacred cows within these corporations? What are things that they're never going to move off? And if I'm doing frontal assaults to those, I'm never going to be able to really move the organization and support it. So we stepped back, took a giant step back, and reworked everything, and really concentrated on a little bit more of the relationships, and also within our own IT organization, we had to break down a lot of the barriers. I mean, application teams always blame the network performance, right? Then the network guys blame the server guys, right?
The storage guys.
The storage guys, yeah. And when all else fails, they blame the CIO. Well, they're right sometimes. But so you guys live this, right? So what are some of the things that you want to hear from us? Because I have to do 3Ds today, and I just don't want to do a bunch of PowerPoints. So Matt, let me ask a question.
Well, there was one question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, in the back.
So what strategies do you use to kind of bridge the relationship between your ShadowIT and your traditional IT? It seems to get a little contentious from my experience, and they feel like their territory is being infringed on. And then my second question would be, how have you taken an application that maybe a ShadowIT has developed and made it so that it's safe and secure for everyone to use it?
Okay. So your first question really is how do you, what strategies did we use to approach ShadowIT and kind of bring them into the fold without making it an adversarial relationship? Okay. Basically, first of all, you have to recognize the value of ShadowIT. It's there for a reason. And the biggest reason it's there is because it's a little closer in the relationship to that given business domain. They understand the terminology, they understand the individual business drivers of that particular program area or that business domain, and they have a more intimate relationship with that client.
And they have the trust.
Then you're centralized, yeah, because they have the trust. So you don't want to break that down, you want to utilize that. The other thing is, you can promote that. What I'm really doing for ShadowIT, I'm giving them a bigger voice. I'm giving them access to things like you need infrastructure as a service to deliver the app. We're going to give you self-provisioning for that. We're going to govern that, and we're going to put some standards around it. But not everything is this big enterprise application. I think in government, too often we focused on the big bang. Everything has to be enterprise. The reality is, only about 10% of everything you develop in a major corporation is going to be at the enterprise level. 90% of those are going to be, 90% of your other solutions are going to be more niche oriented to a particular line of business and a given domain in that line of business. And if once you understand that, then you can really talk that language. So we were able to build a partnership by saying, creating win-wins. This is what we're going to do. And then with, of course, in California with AB 2408 and stuff, the reporting relationship kind of had to be an umbrella. But that's where the centralized shop and the centralized leadership of an IT has to give more than ShadowIT. Because if you come in with guns blazing and you're going to take over the world, one is you're going to fail because you don't have the intimate relationship with that business. And the second is that delivery system is what we really want. That's the service provider model. They're providing the service. We just want to help them broaden that. So I don't know if that kind of answered your question or not. It's not an easy journey because, these guys, the first thing the Shadow thinks is, oh man, they're going to tell us what to do, they're going to tell us how to do it, and then they're going to say no more than they say yes. So our model is never say no without having an alternative of how we can help contribute to the movement.
How do you know who those ShadowIT guys are, just out of curiosity?
Huh?
They don't wear badges, so how do you know who they are?
The biggest ones usually, but so in our case, they were the first to go around IT and create relationships with AWS or Azure, et cetera, right? And what we did, again, is approached those companies as NetApp as a whole and say, show me all your contracts. And one of the first things we did, one of the steps that we took to encourage them to use our services is we came up and go, well, you're already using AWS. It's costing you $1,500 a month. Use AWS, but just use this, and it'll save you $700 a month right off the bat. The savings, and then the back-end continuous looking at savings was, at least for us, a carrot to get them to start to use the services. And because they were now our hybrid cloud strategy, when they came and said, here's the keys, IT, I can't support it anymore, it was just as simple as us taking over the account. And that's the way we've at least entered into the mode. Now, we know there's probably about another 300 people doing ShadowIT stuff in our organization, but we've hit the big ones, at least from a cost perspective when you look at a CFO and a cost perspective. Our plan is eventually to consume them all, but at least that's what we did. Hybrid cloud, use the carrot as the money is the carrot, and then that became the platform to transfer the services over to IT.
Yeah,
Does that help?
So as Matt said, the hybrid cloud really is whether we call it hybrid cloud or you really call it just a distributed way of
distributed data centers,
of placing workload for your consumers or your constituents. So this is really a conceptual of the resource agency, and as you can see, it has the attributes of both nimbleness and shadow-like I call it, as well as governance and proper security. By that I mean is you can provision and self-provision to any of these clouds, but within boundaries, because you have to account for cost, right? So you can't let rebels overrun your cost centers, right? Or you can't even let the program overrun your cost centers. So I'm going to let you, as an application development team that we placed in environmental scientists, and I'm going to give you the rights to provision your own infrastructure. But I'm going to put a quota on that. Once you hit that quota, then we're going to talk about who's going to pay for the next round. So you give them flexibility, but you also govern. So but you're not using dollars as the initial conversation. You're using flexibility. So the ability to utilize localized solution teams versus distributed hybrid cloud service orientations basically is a great model. This one works.
Matt, you mentioned a while back that that you guys, looking at this slide, let's see, right here, I think it is, you guys went from a long time to create change to now change happens very quickly but is very stable. What are some of the ways you guys were able to enable that in your environment?
So for us, it was creating a single source of truth for elements that had to be changed. We started with the traditional infrastructure elements, both virtual and physical. And obviously in traditional IT, that falls into your configuration managed database. We've taken this configuration managed database and built on that. So our configuration managed base today in NetApp goes from the ports and the cables in the data center all the way up to business capability. So when we were talking about providing information, so when we're having conversations about the business about providing it, we now have visibility to how they consume services. We have better visibility to how to make change. And in our case, we're making much more changes today and doing it on a daily basis. We went from a 3-hour change control happening once every 10 days to happening daily about every a change process that takes about 5 minutes. So we're much more enabled to respond to business needs, make changes, and not disrupt our very stable environment. And at the same time, provide levels of visibility into the consummation of our services that we've never had before. Again, we can have completely different conversations with the business about investments, risk, and potential growth that really enables us to focus in on where the company is growing, and even allow us to have conversations about where we need to retire services.
How many of you feel like you can't do your job the way you want to do it? I mean, that you don't have an environment that effectively allows you. No, do you have it as a technician? Do you have the type of environmental culture that allows you to be optimal in your job? Anybody? Anybody feel like they don't have that kind of environment? I mean, okay. So what are some of the constraints that you feel that you have? Anybody? Yeah.
I think it's more for me a paradigm shift. The question that came to my mind is what we were talking about ShadowIT is how do you break down the resistance, the natural resistance that's there to encourage it as opposed to discourage it?
I think you embrace it, but like I think Matt said, is you can move fast but still be secure. There's a difference between different types of applications. Not all of them need the same rigor. Depending, five user system versus a 5,000 user system. Is it public facing? Is it internal facing? What type of information does this system deal with? Is it confidential, sensitive, or is it public information anyway? And I don't really care. So I think it's understanding really a lot to do with what are they working with and how are they working with it, and then enhance their ability to do those things that they're good at, and then supplement those things that they need to change. Now, the only way this really works is if most of the time in private sector, private sector is you really still have to have an umbrella administration over the top of it. But then you can say, look, I'm gonna provide all these services to your ShadowIT, but I'm gonna delegate them back to you. You as the business still have priority over all those resources. You still have the ability to tell them what you need, and those resources are your day-to-day resources. I'm just going to help secure you so you can keep moving at the speed of business, but in a secure mannerism. So that's kind of the marketing and really the direction we took.
Excellent. Actually, I don't have anything to add to that. That's actually pretty much the same thing for us. With one exception. We were under pressure to control ShadowIT from a cost perspective. So that's why we went for the contracts first and then said, well, we'll own the contracts and then have the chargeback model based on those contracts. But we were able to reduce, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact numbers. I think we cut the costs for that ShadowIT leveraging the cloud sector. I think we cut it in half, because we had one contract to negotiate at volume. And again, that seemed to be a great...
So you guys in central IT have economies of scale. You can negotiate better pricing, but still give them exactly what they're looking for.
Yes.
Whereas they go off all these one-offs, now everybody's utilizing resources and budget that is wasting, and they can't do other things they want to do because it costs too much.
Exactly. So from a CFO perspective, the costs are being managed, and then from an individual Shadow IT person, they actually see their costs going down, which then they perceive IT as being an enabler. Pretty much we haven't changed anything but managed the contracts on the back end.
Do you offer quality of service, and if so, how do you monitor and manage that for your clients? How do you know if you're meeting your SLAs?
So we do have SLAs for the services we provide. We look at both customer-facing SLAs, but more importantly, in order to deliver those customer-facing SLAs, we really have to focus on what we call the OLA, operational kind of agreements between what we call customer zero. Customer zero is you have all these different IT internal, like application team, database, infrastructure, and so forth. If they're not effectively collaborating and delivering service to each other as customer zero, there's no way in hell they can deliver to customer one, which are our program areas, effectively. So we need to make sure that these operational, what we call operational agreements are in place and that we're monitoring those. Those then aggregate up and deliver a positive effect on our service level agreements to our clientele. So we do measure those, we do monitor those. We also then try to get feedback back from the customer. Now, is the feedback always going to be great? No. I mean, sometimes they tell us our dog's ugly. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's a perception. But what I find out a lot of times if I'm sitting at, when I'm sitting at the executive table, is someone will bring something up, and that's the one-off. But I've got benchmarks and stuff say, you know what, that's an anomaly. Look, 95% of the time we're hitting what you want. This case we didn't. I'll look into it. But a lot of times people will take that one anomaly and say, this always happens. But if you don't have benchmarks and you're not measuring your own performance, you can't counteract that perception.
Back to using your information wisely as far as your service levels. Yep. So in our case, we have 2 service levels. We have critical, and then we have everything else. So there's either things that align directly to our functional business, and which is about 15 applications of 380. So those are the ones that have a tier 1 type of level service.
Does that make sense when we talk about how internal IT needs to deliver service to each other, to you folks? Do you find that's a problem sometimes? So your customers want time to market, right? So they want the solution. They don't really care that the developer is waiting on a server, or the server is waiting on the application flows before I can put the firewall rules in, right? So that has to be fixed really before you can really focus on delivering to your client. Does that make sense?
So how do you do all this clever hoodie kind of thing with all the extra layers of control that the state wants to put on top with enterprise architecture and information governance and
So there are a lot of I think things that people feel that are a burden to some of the shops, but I think you have to realize that a lot of times those are guidelines, not standards. And if you work with the control agencies and others, and if you make certain business cases, you're allowed to do a lot of things. I mean, quite frankly, we have a tier 3 data center. It was sanctioned, and it was sanctioned by those governing bodies because we showed that this is in line with the overall strategies of the state. We're consolidating, we're virtualizing, we're reducing costs, we're saving energy, we're becoming sustainable, and we're also becoming interoperable because there's no such thing as one center can do everything. I do believe that, in government, we have a lot of rules, but half the people in corporate America in here will tell you they have their own problems, their own bureaucratic ways. I mean, how many of you talk to big companies and, you have an account rep and you're talking about something, next day somebody from that company calls you, hey, I'd like to tell you about NetApp. The NetApp rep just left. It's the same thing. I mean, I think there's ways around it. I think what people get tired of swimming upstream. So I basically say, you got some choices. You go around, over, or through anything.
Okay.
Three minutes.
I think we got 3 more minutes, they said, because I guess they're making up the time on the first session. But we do want to hear some questions because, I mean, we would really want to try to give you some of those answers to the polling questions, or at least some thoughts around those polling questions that Dave had. So you 3 right there has been raising your hand a lot, but no questions. So 3 right here in the middle. 1, 2, 3. You guys got any questions? Come on.
What are some of the challenges you guys see in collecting the information you need to be able to provide these services, right? Is it hard to understand all the ins and outs of your IT and where all your assets are and who's using them and those kinds of things? Is that a challenge for anybody, or is that pretty easy?
I do want to say that basically I do truly believe that we can control our own destiny. Public sector can become as good a service provider and service broker as any private sector industry. I think you really just have to embrace some things. It's not easy to make any kind of cultural or organization transformation. It's not about the technology. The technology is an end to a means, So basically, I think that, all the stuff that people talk about, we can't do this, we can't do this. I won't tell you what I really think that is, but it's BS. Matt, you want to close up?
Oh, no, no, please, why don't you? It's your folks.
So we make as many mistakes as we make successes, and I think one of the keys as you do transformation, you have to have a risk tolerance. I think one of the things the state needs to grow and government is a little bit of more of a risk tolerance. If you're really talking about innovation, flexibility, and agility, we have to create what we call at the agency a shared risk model with our partners, whether they're vendors or business partners. And I think that you have to convey this to your own staff that I tell you what, if you do 7 out of 10 things and they stick, you're awesome. And those 3 things, don't worry about them. You'll recover from them.
Great advice. And we'll both be at our booths, respective booths downstairs for a while if you want to come up and have a chat. So welcome any discussions you'd like to have post. Thank you very much for your time today.
Sure, guys.